the brink. 15 years of peace in Lebanon are shattered by a huge and deadly car bombing. On News and Review today, Lebanon, a country on the edge. Hello, I'm Farah Ismail. Here's some of what you need to know about what's happening now in Lebanon. You have to know about the war that tore the country apart during the 70s and 80s. You have to know about how the neighboring country of Syria helped make peace work after that war. You also have to know about the charismatic man who was Lebanese prime minister for most of the post-war years. And you have to know about what happened on Valentine's Day 2005. Early in the afternoon of February 14th, an explosion blew apart a convoy of cars driving through downtown Beirut. The bomb was so powerful it was felt kilometers away, echoing through the city, but also echoing through people's memories, reminding them of the war in the not-too-distant past. The explosion left a huge crater, flaming, twisted wrecks of cars. 18 people were killed in the bombing, but there was really only one target. A man sometimes known as Mr. Lebanon, and a man seen by many as crucial to a peaceful future there. His name, Rafiq Hariri, former prime minister in Lebanon. In fact, prime minister for 10 of the last 15 years. Before making the move into politics, he had made millions as a businessman, and he used the wheeling and dealing of big business to rebuild a country scarred by war. Pouring money into Beirut, trying to get the city back to its glory days when it was known as the Paris of the Middle East. Some people accused Hariri of corruption and putting the country deep into debt, but even those who accused him couldn't deny that he was the driving force behind the rebirth of Lebanon.
Of all the people you can murder, if you want to destabilize Lebanon, it's Mr. Lebanon, and that's what he was.
Robert Fisk has worked as a reporter covering Lebanon for 30 years. Fisk points out that Hariri had not only the vision to rebuild his country, but he had the connections. That included the prime minister's friendship with a president, President Jacques Chirac of France.
If you wanted investment in Lebanon, you invested because Hariri was here, and because there were billions of dollars secured by his existence, his presence, his life. Hariri could go to France, where he had Jacques Chirac as his personal friend, and he could persuade Europeans to help service the debt, to go on investing in Lebanon. I mean, we haven't got big BHV stores from Paris here because they suddenly decided they'd like to see Lebanon. It's because of Chirac and Hariri.
So who did this? That's still a mystery. But a lot of people point to a country. They say Syria did it. Syria is an Arab country neighboring Lebanon. But more than that, Syria has had thousands of soldiers stationed in Lebanon ever since the Lebanese Civil War. It was a brutal conflict that took thousands of lives. Back in 1975, it was a story that dominated the news. It began when tensions between Lebanese Muslims and Christian groups boiled over. But it would grow to include the larger region around Lebanon. The Palestine Liberation Organization joined the Muslim fighters. Syria was called in to help. Israel sent forces in too. The CBC's Lyndon McIntyre was just one of the many Canadian journalists who tried to make sense of it all.
It was murderous, it was communal, it was hard to figure out the players. There were the Druze, there were the Sunni Muslims, there were the Shia Muslims, there were the Palestinians, there were the Christians, there were the Iranian-backed Hezbollah who were rising up. And around it all were the Israelis.
After 15 years of civil war, a deal was finally reached. As part of the agreement, Syrian troops stayed in Lebanon. There were changes to the constitution and a new national assembly as well. But Syria kept a lot of influence over Lebanese politics. By this past October, that influence was being met with some serious opposition. The United Nations told Syria to pull out its troops. Also in October, Rafiq Hariri quit as prime minister over Syria's involvement in his country's affairs. After resigning his job, Hariri was able to do something pretty rare in Lebanon. He'd pulled together the country's different ethnic and political groups: the right-wingers, the left-wingers, Christian, Muslim, and Druze. They came together hoping to stop the Syrians. And after Hariri was killed, they came together to mourn. Here's a report by Nala Ayed, who is the CBC's reporter based in Beirut.
In the capital, grief is as familiar as the man they're mourning. Still, they were inconsolable. The tears a sign that it has all sunk in. Peace had been destroyed here once more, taking with it this time a leader many credit with the country's march to recovery from the bitter civil war. At the mosque Rafiq Hariri had been building and where he was later buried, Quranic readings melded in with the sound of church bells. Represented were all shades of Lebanon: Shia, Christian, Druze, and others in the tens of thousands united in grief and anger. Members of the pro-Syrian government weren't invited. Foreign dignitaries came, and French President Jacques Chirac, a personal friend, paid respects at the family home. He says the incident has provoked horror and consternation in the international community. Lebanese, too, are still shocked, visiting the scene of the massive blast in droves, trying to make some sense of this new violence. Though the Syrians have denied it, many here blame them for Hariri's killing, fueling further intolerance among Lebanese of Syria's long-standing political and military grip on their country. Yesterday, the U.S. withdrew its ambassador from Damascus over its refusal to let go.
We need our freedom. Syrians don't want to leave us. We want our freedom.
Hariri's death leaves a gaping hole in this country's political scene, and the impact can only be significant. With an election only 3 months away, the focus now will be on keeping that disruption to a minimum.
Hariri's supporters mourned, and then they joined a movement. Again, the different groups saw eye to eye, joining together in the heart of Beirut, demanding Syria get out. 2 weeks after Rafiq Hariri was assassinated, the pro-Syrian government of Lebanon quit. Here again is the CBC's Nala Ayed.
Nothing was going to stop this crowd from having its say, not even a government ban on demonstrations. Thousands streamed into Martyrs Square, armed only with Lebanese flags and anti-government slogans. And in the face of the crush, hundreds of soldiers and riot police simply had to step aside. Those who couldn't enter the city by car came on foot, some going to great lengths to deliver their message. They want freedom, sovereignty, independence. Namely, independence from Syria's far-reaching influence on their country's affairs. Then, the moment they had come for. Lebanon's pro-Syrian government, that many held responsible for the assassination of former Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, was no longer. Inside Parliament, MP after opposition MP called on the government to resign. After a lunch break, the government caved in. Prime Minister Ahmad Karame said that for the good of the nation, his government would step down. Syria has been under growing pressure to quit Lebanon, withdraw its troops and intelligence agents, stop interfering in its neighbors' politics. Many Lebanese adopted the cause, believing that Syria was behind Hariri's killing in a huge bombing 2 weeks ago. Syria denies the allegation, and President Bashar al-Assad told an Italian newspaper it would have been political suicide. But under the glare of international scrutiny, Syria promised again last week to pull back its troops in Lebanon to the border. But in an interview last week, Syrian Minister Buthaina Sha'ban said Syria would not cave in to external pressure.
But it is something that has to be organized between the two governments, and it cannot come as a sudden step because somebody else decided that it has to happen. We are sovereign nations, we have our own interests to look after, just like other countries who are looking after their own interests.
They may have succeeded in toppling the government, but the opposition is calling for the protests to continue. They say the job is only half done. They still have to convince Syria that it's time to leave for good.
Protests like that make it look like Lebanese were unified. But just a week after the pro-Syrian government resigned, thousands of people filled the streets of Beirut in support of Syria, led there by Hezbollah, a longtime fighting force in Lebanon, now looking like a very powerful political force too. Nala Ayed reported on that protest as well.
It was no ordinary workday. There was other business to attend to. They started their journey early this morning for an important 3 o'clock appointment. All answering the call to put on display what organizers describe as the real Lebanon. This, they said, is what the silent majority looks like when it finally speaks. Whole blocks in downtown Beirut, invisible in a sea of people and flags hundreds of thousands strong. Here, Syria is commended and the United States condemned. If you're concerned for Lebanese freedom and Lebanese democracy, you should look now with both your eyes. Aren't the Lebanese people here today? Says Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, head of Hezbollah, the only Lebanese party powerful enough to put on such a spectacular display of opinion. The disciplined Shia-based political party also has a military arm. It's on the US and Canada's list of banned terrorist organizations. Along with the UN demand for Syrian withdrawal is a call for Hezbollah to disarm. But the party is widely respected in this region for its campaign against Israel. Now, Hezbollah is also emerging as a major force in Lebanon's internal political scene at an unstable time. With just one protest, the pro-Syrian Lebanese have emphatically delivered their message, a much-needed boost for Syria, a country that's been isolated by just about everybody else.
The protests on both sides were peaceful. This was not. One in a series of car bombings to target Christian neighborhoods in the weeks following the car bomb that killed Rafiq Hariri. The attacks were seen as retaliation for Christian opposition to Syria's presence in Lebanon. As we've mentioned, Syria is being blamed for the Hariri bombing. An early United Nations assessment didn't go quite that far, but it did blame Syria for a lack of security protection and law and order in Lebanon at the time of the assassination. Opposition politicians in Lebanon said Syria was behind the car bombings in Christian neighborhoods too. We know they are the ones who are planting car bombs, said opposition leader Walid Jumblat. The bombings haven't just shattered buildings and lives, they've also blown apart Lebanon's fragile tourism industry. Travelers had returned to these streets. This is the Palm Beach Hotel. The owner, Khalil Al-Arab, was in the lobby when the bomb killed Rafiq Hariri. Al-Arab was thrown by the explosion, cut by flying glass.
It is a disaster, really. First of all, the size of the bomb, the devastation it made, the area where it happened, which is the main tourist areas, and the person that it hit, who was the most prominent person in the country. So everybody is concerned about the future. Everybody, literally everybody.
The best hotels in Beirut have been filled not with guests, but with construction workers fixing the buildings. But fixing the tourism industry will be harder.
Visiting, maybe it's not a period to visit because we residents of Lebanon, we have our homes in the mountains, our homes in the countryside, our restaurants, and yet we are hardly going out because it's not a time to have a good time. And people come to Lebanon for a good time. And so definitely it's not the time to come. I shouldn't say this maybe, but it's not the time because people are mourning still.
I always used to come to Lebanon, even when I was living in Canada. There is something extremely alive about Lebanon. And there is this melting pot that makes it unique also.
Rania Choueri came back to Lebanon during the optimistic times of Rafiq Hariri. She returned to Beirut from Canada, where she and her family went during the Civil War. Rania was 21 when they returned from Montreal. She opened a jewelry store last year, part of Lebanon's revival. Now, after the killing of the former prime minister, Rania is part of the uncertainty.
Things are getting slower. People are always closing. People are always down. People are not working. The mind is not here. The heart is not here. The money is not here. I mean, you know, now because you're not working, We all think about the manifestation, what's going to happen, the independence, the peace. We want peace, peace, peace.
Peace is what you hear about here too. This is Bar 1975, named for the year the Civil War began. The decor, definitely combat style. Bar 1975 is in downtown Beirut, right on the street that separated Muslim and Christian parts of the city. Now it brings people together to party. It's quiet on this particular night. Rumors that there was going to be a bombing kept people away. But not Maurice, who is Christian, and Mohammed, who is Shia Muslim.
We have about 18 different sects in Lebanon, and all of them come here. I mean, you couldn't tell one from the other. We're all human. Everybody looks the same. Now, if you look in the series of events that are happening right now, there's a lot of building up of emotions, but nobody really wants the war. Nobody wants to fight. The lessons have been learned and engraved in too deep for this.
In this bar that sits on the old divide, opinions are united.
My biggest worry is war again, and this is bad, you know. Eventually all of us will leave, if a war will happen.
6 weeks after the terrible bombing that brought back the prospect of war, a key announcement by Syria. In a letter to the United Nations, Syria said that it would withdraw all its soldiers and its intelligence forces from Lebanon before elections due to be held in May. Now people must wait to see whether Syria makes good on its promise. Also, wait and see what role Syria plays in those elections. And wait and see if anyone can step into the void left by Rafiq Hariri. If anyone can bring together Lebanon's divided people and pull the country back from the edge of conflict. And that's News in Review. I'm Farah Ismail. Thanks for watching. Canada says no.
Canada will not take part in the proposed ballistic missile system.
And the United States isn't happy about it.
We don't get it.